Welcome. We are the Ministry of the Real Truth, and we are continuing our reading of what we believe to be a great book. We're glad that this person in the comments below the book recommended it, suggested it and recommended it, and we suggest and recommend it to you to read how this particular family from Linkowitz, Russia, managed to escape from it and go to live in America, and life was hard continually, but they eventually, especially the author, became successful in his special way. It's a bit of a tearjerker. We remember reading The Hiding Place, walking home from a job. It usually takes us half an hour to an hour. It took us 3 hours because we read the whole book, and all that way we were in tears because it was so moving. Listening to Barry Maguire's tape after we had an old Walkman, and we got this old greatest hits of Barry Maguire tape from a second-hand shop, a couple of bucks or it, and listened to it, and it was so moving. If you ever had moments like that, let us know by subscribing to our channel, giving us a like, and then telling us what book moved you, or what music moved you emotionally, spiritually, etc. We're quite interested to see if other people out there have had a similar experience. Maybe it's the Spirit of God moving you, or something like that, or something, right? Anyway, we're starting from where we left off. Basically, him and his friend Eli, the author and his friend Eli, when they're young, became pool sharks. They're ripping off their brother-in-law money from his till, from his shop, the register, right, and gambling and all this sort of stuff. And then they got caught by the sister. She gave him a spanking and all this sort of stuff. And then him and his friend bought a bicycle, and then years later he thanked her by presenting her with a fur coat. This is when he became successful. He decided to pay back the people that he stole from. Him and his friend are planning trips to ride their bicycles near the steep grades near the Santa Fe Railroad. It was clear-cut evidence that he was a full-fledged cyclist. They planned trips they would take on Sundays. Each week they rode to a nearby town, starting with one nearest home and finally making their longest excursion to Monmouth, Illinois. An Iowa gold rush. At about the time the United States entered World War I in 1917, his wandering family was relocating. Brother Morris failed in the grocery business in St. Louis. Brothers-in-law Frank Hoffman and Sam Lundmeyer were not earning a decent living working at sewing machines. All three decided to open up shoe repair shops because some distant relative was rumoured to have made good money at it. Brother opened his shop in Des Moines, Iowa. His two brothers-in-law pulled their meagre savings to buy a shop in Indianola, Iowa. To him, the author of this wholesale moving on the part of his family was in the nature of a gold rush, and he didn't want to be left out. He visited his mother in St. Louis and received her permission to move to Indianola. He had painted a rosy picture of the future this revolutionary new business had in store for him, as contrasted to his being a clerk. Of course, he was to continue school, but he could learn the business by working after school hours. Indianola was a small town. Its population in 1918 was about 3,000 people. To it, one could rightfully apply the term typical, followed by Midwestern agriculture. Cultural. The business of the town was centered around the square, a solid square block, and the center was neatly landscaped and had a platform in the very middle for bands, 4th of July speakers, and community get-togethers. And he continues describing what it was like. Worked at his brother-in-law's repair shop. Looks like he was doing self-stitching on shoes and sometimes trying on customers' shoes as he repaired them, I guess. He trained on some discarded shoes until he became good enough to take a chance on customer shoes. Okay. He did shoe shining. He was a shoe shine boy. That business was extra profitable because polish cost so little. The dime they got was 9 cents gross profit. If they did 120 pairs, it meant $12 less, $2 paid to the barber boy, etc., etc. The Victrola would be going all the while they were shining. It's a wind-up record player. Very, very old. You know, like the old his father's voice one. 78, you know, that's what 75 RPMs or whatever it was. Most customers knew the collection of records as well as they did and requested those they liked. They never bought any new records but used only those that came with the purchase of the shop. Katie, beautiful Katie, you were the only girl for me, was the favourite. Alexander's Ragtime Band was pretty high on the hit parade of their customers. And he continues. Life in Indianola, though, was far from a gold rush. High school senior, a year of great happiness. Okay, there's his brother-in-law, Morris or someone, ended up doing well because the army used to bring their shoes to a shop to fix them up by the sackfuls. So things were looking up. And then he discovers girls. Pin-up girls. Okay, not actually poster girls, pin-up girls, but actual girls he considered pin-ups. In high school graduation, climbing up the ladder of success. Finally, he's climbing the ladder to success. Still in the modern shoe repair shop, which they renamed the modern shoe shop. Let's rephrase that. He was still working in the shoe repair shop, but they called it the modern shoe repair shop. Okay, and they hired a Negro to do the shoe shining. Negro would. He was not exposed to the temptation of losing any money playing pool or poker. He had completely forgotten about the sordid aspect of his life. In Des Moines, he had wholesome substitutes for the vices which he indulged in while living in Galsburg. In the first place, he was earning good pay. He had a Saturday liberties for football games, which he never had previously. Business boomed after the armistice on November 11, 1918. Instead of the soldiers discarding their army attire and changing to civilian clothes, they bought the best military clothes they could obtain. They wanted to return to their hometowns looking like officers. This was especially true when the boys from overseas were discharged. They wanted to get out of their ill-fitting uniform, hobnailed shoes, dirty hats, and worn leggings. They wanted everything new and better fitting. Then he had an idea. Instead of clerking for his brother, he wanted to install a concession of other type merchandise in his store. Morris said it would be okay. He permitted him to install a small showcase where he carried a line of soldiers, insignia and silk hat cords. He was to continue to sell shoes and leggings as he had been doing, but instead of drawing $25 a week, he would draw no salary at all. The profit on the showcase merchandise was to be his sole compensation. Early in that January, he received his initial stock of insignia and cords. They sold as fast as lightning. It was only a question of getting them fast enough. On December 18, 1918, he was 16. A month later, he cleared as much as $80 profit in a single week. His average profit was about $65 each week. A terrible conflict raged in his heart and mind for many days. On the one hand, he wanted his brothers with a family to procure the profit now accruing to him, and on the other hand, he was reluctant to go back to the nominal weekly wage. Happily, he resolved this problem. He sublet a part of a candy store in another location and sold similar merchandise to that of his brothers. During the year, he made over $3,000, so things were looking up for him. He had been earning far more in his business. He had the good sense to realise that a boy in knee pads was unlikely to earn nearly as much elsewhere. His introduction to fornication. Maybe he moved. Okay. Left for St. Louis to make a home with his mother and to enter into a new phase of living. He enrolled at a school and he joined Frida, his sister, in a job hunt. She was hired as a stenographer at the office of the Beerman Company, junk dealers on North 12th Street. They also had another business, the sale of tyres and tubes on 33rd and Locust Streets, and he was hired as the sole person in charge. The reason for his unique job was the fact that what was normally a heavy automobile traffic street was now completely without traffic. Due to some political scandal, the streets were torn up. They were stacked for miles with wooden paving blocks, but no work was being done. The situation lasted for many months, from mid-April past September, when he quit the job to enroll in college. Days passed without a single customer to disturb his newly developed reading habit. His sister collected many old back issues of magazines at the junkyard where she was employed. Old copies of the Literary Digest, Saturday Evening Post, and countless detective story magazines comprised his range of reading. He liked best of all the Octavius Roy Cohen series, depicting life of the coloured people in the larger cities of the South. On the whole, it was a dull, uninteresting job that afforded him no opportunity to learn the tyre business. Contact with Ike Beerman, his employer, was irregular and rare. 2 or 3 times a week he would drop in to see if he was asleep. The $20 weekly wage was in effect a payment for being a watchman rather than a salesman. For a change, climaxed by a tough winter in Altoona, the spring and summer loafing job with the Royal Tyre Company was not altogether unwelcome. And he gets to know his neighbours. And he meets Diana, who wasn't very pretty by the sounds of it. Maybe she was. What's he saying here? Dolores, about 45, had a face very much like the dog she took out for its airing. He didn't mean to be facetious or unkind in making that comparison, for subsequently other fellows, without any encouragement from him, referred to her as dogface. Always in colourful negligees, high heels, satin bed slippers, and faces made up, the ladies alternated in the caring for the dog's needs for the outdoors. They would not have been so decollete, he was sure, if it were not for their knowledge that there was no traffic and rarely any person passing on the sidewalk. Diana was young and beautiful. Her fiery red hair, milk-white skin, and greenish blue eyes tantalised him from the first time he saw her. After several greetings from Diana, he picked up enough courage to walk over to her under the pretense of currying favour with the dog. The old admire their pet, go through the pet to get the woman trick. He wanted to kiss her badly, but then maybe put it aside. And she asked him, "Honey, ain't you ever made love to a woman?" She asked. Then in a flash it came to him. The competitors and Des Moines who brought women to a store, the words whore and prostitute he had heard boys use contemptuously. So this was what a whore was, a female who lacked a sense of shame and required no coaxing or overtures to be kissed and embraced. I don't recall what, if any, words were exchanged. The next thing I remember was Diana unbuttoning the fly of my pants, urging me and helping me to undress. She was the master of the situation. Then, while I was still in a semi-hypnotic state, she initiated him into his first act of fornication. He felt ashamed and wanted to run away from the scene of degradation. When Diana spoke to him, he couldn't open his mouth to reply. When she had given him a hygienic treatment, he hurriedly dressed and made ready to leave, but she reached out her hand to him. He thought it was an invitation to shake hands to appease his sulky mood, which must have been apparent to her. He offered his hand to her, and she let out a loud burst of laughter, which continued off and on until she saw him to the door. She paused to tell him that while it was nice to get his maiden head, she was not doing it for free. She went on to explain that she was charging various prices for her services, but because he was a good kid and neighbour, she wanted only $2 from him. When he paid her, she escorted him downstairs. There they spotted Dolores in the living room. Dolores smiled and asked him to come back again. In the meantime, much to his embarrassment, Diana laughingly told her how he expected to be given a handshake and to be thanked for giving her the privilege of initiating him to sex. It felt good to breathe the air of the outdoors. He ran to the store next door and was grateful to find everything intact. He went to look in the mirror over the sink at the rear of the store to see if he had changed because of the experience he had just had. He felt he had done a great wrong and that he should never again be a sad person. So he lost it to this prostitute, and then she charged him $2. He didn't realise she was that way, right? Until you fulfilled. He entered college at Washington University. He was getting a lot of flack because he's the only boy on the campus in knee pants. He was poor in all athletics. When they were engaged in the compulsory mile or longer runs on the outdoor track, he was always the last to come in. At handball, he was always beaten, but thoroughly enjoyed playing, though he seldom found anyone willing to play with him or play him. Many boys earned their room and board at the dormitories by acting as waiters in the mess hall. Several of his friends worked a full 8 hours on the night shift of the post office. Dave Crystal and Mayor Roudman were two who pursued this rugged grind. So life is very up and down for this particular author as a kid, as an adult. And then his first sexual affair. He attended parties or went to affairs of college students at the YMHA. On rare occasion he visited house of prostitution, but for the most part his energies were consumed by schooling, work and newfound social activities. His first sexual affair was with one of the girls working as an examiner in a factory. Coming down the elevator when her one day after work, he made a date to take her to the movies that night. She was a plain looking girl, but she had a showgirl figure. When he called her that evening and saw her dressed up, he was so dazzled by her stunning appearance. He took her for a soda after the movies. Then suggested a spot in the park where they could talk. It was no conquest. Like a ripe apple about to fall from the tree, she was eager and ready to give herself to him. As sensuous and passionate as he must have been, he had the consideration and moral scruples to make certain she was no virgin by bluntly asking her. Having her assurance, he experienced for the first time the thrill of sexual relationship with one who hungered for it as he did. Thereafter, for many months, he saw her several times a week. In the summers it was in the park, and winter or inclement weather it was a room at a lodging house. This steady gratification gave him better balance. And then he learns to treat all females as ladies. He spent nights at the leading hotel, having Milton's companionship. This is his friend. He found it easy to keep his mind off women, particularly since he impressed him as not being interested in them. As far as he could observe, he was all business and no monkey business. The following morning in the hotel, he was to experience as frightening an escapade as he had ever had in his life. He meets this lady looking at dresses, and oh my gosh, she's looking admiringly at these dresses, which one she liked best. She picked 3 or 4 as her choice. He, the author, said, "You can have them if you go to bed with me." By her silence, I could see that she was surprised. Well, he could see that she was surprised at his crude offer. "Pardon me," she said. "Will you repeat what you just said?" So once again he said, "You can have these dresses if you go to bed with him." She could have the dresses if she went to bed with him. Then, commanding the sweetest and coyest manner, she replied, "Maybe, but before I do, I must tell you this. Remember the big strapping giant of a man who handed you the mail at the desk? That's Mr. X, my husband. I'll just telephone downstairs and find out whether it is alright with him." In a second she was at the telephone talking. Fortunately for him, Mr. X was out. This he learned when Mrs. X said, "Tell him to come up to room 202 as soon as he returns from the bank." He started pleading with the lady. He brought up the fact that he left the door open and she closed it. Her explanation was, "I don't want the chambermaids making a practice of going into the salesman's room to look at their samples." She then went on to paint a picture of what Mr. X would do to him for the insult to his wife. She mentioned the fact that in Oklahoma, where they ran a boarding house, Mr. X once shot a drunken Indian because of an insult to her. "He was drunk and an Indian, while you are sober and white," she added. Seeing that he could not appease her, he did not bother to take any of his belongings, but fled from the room like a madman. He decided to leave his car in the garage for a few days while he got out of town. Fortunately, as he was headed out for the interurban station to get the train for Nowata, Oklahoma, right across the border from Kansas, he ran into Milton. He told him to get the car, pick up his belongings and samples, and meet him at the Campbell Hotel, Nowata. He gave him no time to ask questions. It was all agreeably surprised. He was agreeably surprised to find that Milton brought all of his things to Nowata later in the afternoon when he completed his business. The author did not sleep too well for several nights. He was probably scared after that, because that was a period when the Ku Klux Klan was riding high, and he felt they would join Mr. X in coming after him. This narrow escape from whatever Mr. X might have chosen to do with him served to impress him with the stupidity of the crude, blunt approach to a female. He loses his pants and runs into the KKK. He was dazzled by his first glimpse of the downtown business section of Tulsa, the Tulsa Hotel. Then the leading in the state was a beehive of activity. From the large number of big-brimmed cowboy Stetson hats, one could ascertain the fact that oil and cattlemen made it their headquarters. All kinds of fantastic stories were told about the extraordinary spending and gambling on the part of the oil men. It was the old story of easy come, easy go. Many who had been poor farmers became millionaires overnight as oil was struck on their property. The atmosphere of the hotel was enough to excite any visitor. That is why he decided to make the Tulsa Hotel the base of his selling operations in the state. He worked out of Tulsa during the week but returned to it for the weekends. His first weekend in Tulsa hotel resulted in another embarrassing situation for him. He got into a poker game with some salesman he met through Mr. Max Broider, a brother of one of his bosses. The game wound up in his room, where he played freeze out with a Mr. Drexel of Kansas City. After losing all the money he had for travelling expenses, he lost his watch to him. He took him seriously when he put up $10 against his pants, and he won those too. He was travelling with only one suit and could not leave his room, the author's room, because he took his pants with him. There he was in his room with no money, no watch and no trousers. Since he couldn't leave, he kept calling the rooms of Messrs. Broider and Drexel. Finding him out, he kept paging them in the lobby. Several hours later, Mr. Broider came to his room with his trousers and watch, which he returned to him with the understanding that he was to return to him the $35 which he paid to Drexel. He called St. Louis and spoke to Mr. Goldberg, his brother's partner, because he did not dare divulge such matters to his brother. Goldberg took it good-naturedly and wired him money to clear up his debts and continue his travelling. Leaving Tulsa, he stopped in Drumright, about 55 miles west, where he visited his cousins. They drove him to Shamrock, only 6 miles south, on a terrible dirt road. Here, for the first time, he saw oil derricks by the thousands. Those are probably those, they're like those Johnny Walker things that, like, you know, they're full of liquid and they just keep tipping over. Or like that bird, you know, it's like, you had to know what those things were in those days. Yeah. You see them on movies in the deserts. It's like continually going into the ground and coming back up. I think those are derricks. They were so close together that it looked as if one could step from one to the other, and so forth. And he sees his folks, and he's introduced to half a dozen salespeople, and he's attracted to a pretty girl. He learned she was a school teacher, acting as a sales girl during her vacation. He took no time to getting around to her for just a minute. It took to whisper to her, "Where can I see you at 8 tonight?" Without hesitation, she told him, "At the ballpark." He thought no one could possibly have guessed that in so brief a period he had made a date. An hour or so later, the store closed. They explained that they were eager to get back during daylight because the Ku Klux Klan held meetings at night at a point about halfway between Shamrock and Drumright. They said it was not safe for Jews to be caught in such a spot because one could never know what sport hooded masked man might indulge in if by chance they ran into some Jews at night. His folks live in a frame shanty in the rear of the store, etc., etc. The folks had a good cook, and he remembers enjoying all the meals prepared by Irene. At the dinner table, they again talked about the Ku Klux Klan. He learned that business had fallen off considerably because the Klansmen and their families boycotted the store. To illustrate to what extent the KKK was breeding hate, mistrust, and disrupting friendships, his brother Abe told of how he was blackballed from the Masonic Lodge. So he's part of a Masonic Lodge, right? Freemasonic Lodge. Prior to the KKK operation, Abe was beloved by the community. He was a young man of about 25, scrupulously fair in his dealings with everyone. He was exceptionally kind and open-handed in helping anyone who required it. With a population of less than 1,500, he was the town's idol, until the KKK made the cross a symbol of hate. He was sadly disillusioned when he was denied admittance to membership in the Masonic Order. His bitter feeling was assuaged to some extent by the fact that in the still of the night some members of the Klan had expressed their sorrow. They vowed their unyielding affection for Abe, but explained the necessity for their being members of the Klan. A little before 8, the author told the folks he would like to roam about the town for a while. A little boy directed him to the park. He had no trouble in finding his date. She was as eager as he was for the embrace, for the merging of warm breath as they paused between kisses to peer into each other's eyes, and for the final fulfillment. Getting it on. Doing the whoopee. He felt uneasy when the school ma'am, in the course of their later discussion about the KKK, revealed that her brother and father were members. She, however, appeared to be an intelligent, warm-hearted person who clearly understood the vicious place the Klan had assumed in American life. She thought that the Klansmen were generally irresponsible, shiftless men who failed as heads of families. She contrasted the unhappy, frustrated lives of most families in the community with the happy, integrated lives of his people. She was far-sighted and understood that the basis of the clan's existence would be eliminated when the economy of the country was stable as well as prosperous. People who are well-fed and well-housed are not so apt to hate their neighbours as those who find the business of making a living a constant, unyielding torment. The following night, the author prevailed upon his brother Abe to drive past the grounds where the clan assembled. It was a gruesome sight. Cars filled with men were coming from both directions and parking on the big field opposite the clan meeting place. Hundreds of men were already wearing their white hooded regalia, making a colourful sight as they moved about in the dark night with only the huge lighted cross serving as a beacon. They had planned to drive through to Drumright, but on a second thought considered it discreet to turn back. As him and his brother Abe recalled the anti-Semitism they had experienced in their childhood at St. Louis, because it emanated from Italians, Poles and Irishmen, they felt it was strictly a Catholic phenomenon. Now, or then, however, they realised that the KKK was strictly a Protestant organisation. It made them think differently. The sailman returns to Galsburg. Okay, it looks like he was in a little poker game. He won, this guy they played won all the money, so he had to take off to catch a train. They were completely broke. If they had played for high stakes, they would have really been in deep trouble. They all agreed that as a rule, rich men refuse to play for big stakes, while those who cannot afford to lose are willing to risk their all. Too, it usually winds up that in a contest between the poor and rich, the latter is usually the winner. So that old and trite as the expression is, appears to be true, that most often money goes to money. Those who have money take the money of those who have limited money. The salesman returns to Galsburg. He's disappointed in love. Then he meets another woman he'd seen before at the age of 13 or 14, sweet and pretty, and then he sees her again and she's like 18 or 19. And he's smitten by her beauty and charm.